What's up? This is Rebel Radio.
What up? What up? This is DJ Newmark.
This is Peanut Butter Wolf.
It's your boy. It's okay.
Keep checking out Rebel Radio.
Rebel Radio.
This is Rebel Radio.
We're in the place right here. Rebel Radio is going down.
Would you say Rebel Radio?
Oh, wait. Let's do it again.
Rebel Radio.
Welcome to Rebel Radio. My guest today is Franki Chan, founder of IHEARTCOMIX, the record label, events company, agency, marketing agency, man of many talents. He's also known for the event series Check Yo Ponytail. He describes his business as the intersection of music and geek culture. He's going to talk to us about letting go. He's just recently shut down his events business so he can focus on other areas. He's going to kind of talk us through what it's like to make some pretty big changes like that. And we're going to reminisce a little bit about the old days. We used to do a club together called Loose Tooth about 10 years ago, which was kind of at the start of this electro thing that continues to this day. And let's hear now our interview with Franki Chan. Franki Chan, welcome, man. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate you making the trip.
My pleasure.
So we're going to talk about IHEARTCOMIX, about Check Your Ponytail. How long have you been doing that?
Off and on for, I guess, 8 years or so.
Okay. And I know that's going on hiatus, but it's been a big part of the club scene here in LA and meaningful elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
You know, just what you're doing. I think you're a really interesting entrepreneur that, you know, we met, what was that, 2005, that we did Loose Tooth together with Steve and Herb Magazine and Dem Jeans and all of that.
Totally.
That was kind of interesting for me because, you know, I had been, through Herb and otherwise, you know, I'd been involved in clubs for a decade or two already at the time, and yet I'd never really experienced that, like a party like that, and that genre, and you know the stuff that you guys were doing was really all new to me.
I think it was just new.
Yeah.
At the time.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's part of what I love about this business is that like shit just emerges that didn't exist, you know, last year.
Well, you know, what's funny too is what me and Steve and Jason were doing at the time, it didn't come out of dance music. It came out of punk scene. You know? So it just kind of happened to fall into the herb world. Right. Dance and rap and all that stuff.
So how did that happen for you guys?
Well, you know, like the politics of like the underground punk scene through like the mid 90s through the early 2000s was very strict. Mm-hmm. You know, like pretty much there was a ban on fun. You know, so it's like like heavy politics, no nothing to do with major labels, a lot of like people exploring, you know, like gender issues and racial issues and all these things, you know. So anything that, you know, could be construed as a good time was kind of like frowned upon because it put people in a precarious place.
Sure.
But
and were you involved in the punk scene?
Yeah.
Okay.
I was playing in bands and doing shows, and Steve kind of came from that world too.
Okay.
And while we didn't know each other in the very early days, because I was living in Seattle and he lived in Santa Barbara. But I think that there was an undercurrent that began to kind of develop where certain artists from the underground kind of began to make music that had more of a dance element to it. At the same time, you know, like there was a revival of like 80s music at clubs, and then mainstream hip hop began to kind of make pop songs. Yeah. You know, so there's all these kind of, there was this like environment of stuff kind of going on at the same time, and it was hard to deny, you know, wanting to go dance and have fun. And at least for like me, it's like we were doing. I was in Bellingham, Washington, like 1999 to 2000, and I was almost of age or just turned of age to go to bars, but I was doing punk shows in this warehouse, and not everyone in the crowd was old enough to go, so I would just start playing records afterwards, and people would start to dance, and it just was like
the same crowds.
It was like we would have like punk shows, and then it would be like, well, what are we gonna do now? Like, I'll throw in some Prince or something.
Yeah.
But like, even though it's a very normal concept now, at the time it felt very radical.
Crazy.
It was like, okay, well, we're gonna dance now. Like a room of kids like dressed in black that were like,
right,
not into that kind of music, allowing themselves to like do that. And as that turned into actual dance nights, turned into me and Steve met like before I moved here, but then when I moved to Los Angeles at the end of 2003, started a club night, and then Steve joined shortly after, and we were kind of coming at the same approach where it's like all this repressed fun. It's like, let's just play the songs that we really like.
What was that club called?
It was called Fucking Awesome.
Oh yeah.
And I think on both sides, not just for our scene, but then in terms of the Hollywood scene, in terms of like bottle service clubs and like everything kind of being based around famous people going to nights and lines and all these things, and we were we were anti all that stuff, but also kind of anti everything that we had come from.
Sure.
So it created something new.
Yeah.
Even though as artists or DJs, we were like terrible. Like we didn't know how to mix yet, or like any of that stuff. We didn't understand that side of the skill set of DJing.
Yeah.
We just were playing songs that we liked and then engaging our crowd. And I remember people like Adam 12 or AM, all these people like coming and like checking us out and being like, what the fuck is this?
Like, not getting it.
Yeah.
Sure.
And actually like being mad that there were like people coming to our shows because they're like, we're real DJs.
Right. I mean, I've definitely had moments of that, even at Loose Tooth. I don't think I was mad, but I certainly, I come from that tradition, right?
Yeah.
Where the DJ, it's all about the skills. And it's been, I'm 44. It's been a journey for me to realize and accept the fact that most people don't give a shit about that.
Well, like especially now.
Yeah.
Like especially once like Serato and like different things like that kind of like opened up the ability to I DJ to everybody.
Yeah.
At least for us, it's like it wasn't like we had those songs. Like prior to laptop DJing, you still had to go find all those tracks.
Sure.
On vinyl.
Absolutely.
It's a lot of money and time and investment. It's not like anyone could do it, whether you had the like skills or not. You still had to find them.
Absolutely.
And
now I kind of have the opposite reaction. Like if you hear a bad DJ now, you just go like, how is this even possible? Like, it's so easy.
Totally.
For, like, to just not be terrible.
Yeah, it's true.
Like you almost have to like work at it.
Yeah.
But go back. When did you guys realize? Tell me like what was that first night like at Fucking Awesome, or when did you realize that there was really something there?
Pretty quickly. I mean, the first couple months of Fucking Awesome didn't include Steve Aoki. I don't think we said his last name. It was me and Harmar Superstar.
Oh yeah.
And at the time, like I really didn't know anyone here. I moved here and actually couldn't find a job and couldn't find a place to live.
Sure.
And Fucking Awesome was like an excuse to meet folks, and I would like make a flyer every day and just go out every single night and pass out the flyer, partly just to invite folks to the club, partly because I was looking for a couch to like crash on. You know, like
Totally.
it was very just like trying to survive.
Yeah.
But I don't like at least like the scene we were from in LA at the time was very small. Like it was like that block and a half was kind of where the majority of the nights were going on, and there was a different themed night every week, every night at a different club, and I don't think there was anyone else just going out there and like begging people to come to their one thing,
Right.
you know?
Yeah.
So, and Beauty Bar where it happened was pretty small. It was like maybe like 150 cap.
Right.
So right away there was kind of energy there that was new.
Mm-hmm.
And then especially when Steve joined, because he was from here and had like a bit more core friends, you know,
Right.
like that energy just kind of really happened fast.
Sure.
I mean, I think we did the first Fucking Awesome in like mid-November of 2003,
Mm-hmm.
and like he was part of it by like mid-January, and then
Okay.
I think by April we were starting our second night at Cinespace
Nice.
on Tuesdays.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, you know, within a year we had 4 nights going, and then we eventually stopped Fucking Awesome and got Loose Tooth
Okay. Yeah.
going, and then everything unraveled.
Sure. Absolutely. Look at you now.
Yeah.
It's such a crazy journey you've been on, and you know, you talked about moving here without a job and that, and you know, I read the Fast Company piece, which talks I think it calls you a failed comic book artist,
Mm-hmm.
which I don't know is entirely fair. That you know, I've seen you still integrate a lot of comics into everything else you do.
I think like the term failed sounds harsh in that article, but I mean, I came here with the intention of trying to make comics and just never even had a chance to try.
Right.
Like all this other stuff kind of just happened.
Yeah.
And I still draw very often. Like the majority of our comics, like
Yeah.
illustrative art is mine.
Yeah.
But I still mean to one day get to that ambition of trying to make comics.
Well, but you're sort of doing that in a different way, right? Like
Yeah.
you're integrating it into the music and the events and you know everything else you're doing, right? Because there's comics or there's illustration there, you know, and you've created like a signature style,
Yeah.
you know, that I see in everything you do. You know, and that's one of the things that made me interested in talking to you on this show is that like you're, you know, there's this idea in business of the pivot. And I think that, I don't know that that's necessarily been a conscious thing from you, although it seems like it, you know, reading your blog, you talked about, I think you called this year the year of evolution.
Mm-hmm.
And so you announced that you're going to step away from party promoting, right? And focus on other areas of the business,
Yeah.
which sounds like a very, you know, businessman's calculated move. Whereas the stuff you were just talking about earlier sounds much more just like instinctive.
Yeah.
So how is that, what's that evolution been like for you to go from making those kind of gut decisions to what seems to be a much more planned and sort of thought out path for the business?
It was something that it took me a while to get used to. I guess that instinctual thing, or even like accidental thing of like just kind of falling into stuff, like that was the main path I was on for a while, especially at first.
Yeah.
You know, so there's been a couple eras of what IHEARTCOMIX does, and I feel like the time frame we were just talking about was like one era where one thing kind of led to the next, which kind of ended up making like the basic ingredients of who we are, but I definitely didn't go into it with any kind of plan. you know. So the club nights into the first version of the record label and the launching the website, and then just kind of like the general presence of the brand from like 2004 to 2009 was kind of like one era.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was about a year that it was kind of off. It existed in theory, but there wasn't really any activity
Sure.
going on. And then when I decided to bring it back, there was more of a plan in the sense of that, like, I knew I had to build from a base and like really have an idea where I wanted to let go. But even that has been an evolution in the environment showing me where to go, kind of realizing more where our like what we're best at, really learning business,
Mm-hmm.
which I think, especially up until the last 2 or 3 years, and I didn't really like focus on all that much. It was always about the art of it or the idea of it,
Mm-hmm.
and just kind of very much that classic, like, it's all gonna like work out,
Sure. Yeah.
Then like the restart of it, which I did focus on Check Yo Ponytail at first, in the sense of like I just wanted one thing that I could do well.
Yeah.
And it was always, even if you look back to like the early days of Check Yo Ponytail 2, which was like 2010 or so, there was always like video component to it. Like we filmed all the
Mm-hmm.
shows
Mm-hmm.
and made videos out of that like went on online. There was tons of like animation and art and all kinds of things, like, and we launched a new website with that had a editorial piece and everything. And actually we like launched that before we even brought back IHEARTCOMIX.
Mm-hmm.
And which was a challenge when we brought IHEARTCOMIX back, to kind of bring that more back to the forefront. But we didn't know at the time. It was just kind of just like, let's just do this one thing
Right.
well.
Yeah.
But that led to getting an investment in 2012, which at that time promoting was still our primary source.
Mm-hmm.
And it seemed at the time that we had a real chance of kind of growing that and making it, but the reality over the next couple of years was that like the real major beasts in terms of like AG, Golden Voice, Live Nation, all these guys, it was just like an impossible thing to compete with.
Yeah.
And at the same time, like even going back to the reason that I moved here, like my heart was always kind of really more in the other things,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of like creating the videos or art or stories and characters and all of that.
Yeah.
But it was a really large process to kind of allow myself to let that stuff go.
Mm-hmm.
Redefine for other people like who I can be or what IHEARTCOMIX can be.
Yeah.
And financially build out those other things to a point to where it was like okay to like let that stuff go.
Mm-hmm.
Even with the facts like yelling at us, like even with
Sure.
it being really loud, is like
Yeah.
like events are not working.
Yeah.
Because there's been so many like things that have changed. Like if nothing else, like I'm 37 now. I'm not 24. Like
Right.
trying to go out every night. Like I just
Absolutely.
it just doesn't matter.
Right.
And there's like and the landscape of the scene has changed. And I think that really like the realization that we're like underutilizing our our relationships that we work so hard to like build, and actually like how other people see us or hold the like brand, maybe even on a higher level than what we do ourselves.
Sure.
You know, and really kind of like trying to embrace that.
Yeah.
You know, like even going back to that first club night, like I had a job at the Virgin record store, like a part-time job that I really felt dependent on, that I had to have to think that I could like pay rent.
Right.
And, you know, eventually like they let me go because they were like thinning out their like staff, and it was like the best thing for me because I realized I didn't have to have a job.
Mm-hmm.
Like I made it work with with like throwing nights.
Yeah.
And it was kind of the same thing where it's just like slowly it went away, and it was like, you know what, like everything is so much better.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I just don't have to do this.
Yeah. Yeah. So talk about that process of letting go, right? Because like you said, the facts, the data is kind of yelling at you, but, you know, I think there's an internal process that you have to go through, right, to be able to let go of certain things. And, you know, it's not often an easy question for people that build businesses to answer, what business am I in?
Sure.
Right. You know, that's like a consultant's, like you know, it's easy from the outside, but from the inside that, you know, there's a lot that goes into that. So can you talk about that process for you, what things you had to kind of confront to be able to make that change?
Well, the number one thing was the narrative, or like what people understood about who we are, what they think we do, what we want to do.
Yeah.
And like those are big questions that all throughout last year was like, that was like my number one goal was to finish 2015 with a very clear idea of who we are. Because, you know, like, again, there's all these things that I wanted to like do, and we had been doing, but then there was this one thing that most people knew us for, which was also like the one thing that was kind of dying, you know?
Yeah.
And so it's like, if I go to a party and like say I'm like out with like Tom Windish, you know, like someone who is like big in the music bit business world, and he introduces me to someone else that is maybe from a different kind of world, and he's like, this is Franki Chan, he owns IHEARTCOMIX, they throw really great parties.
Right.
And it's like, that's not the perception that I want. Right. You know, and then it's like, so.
But it's said as a compliment, and that's his perception of you.
Sure.
Right? Yeah.
Which, you know.
Yeah.
You know, even like, and like he's someone who's a friend who I hang out with a lot, who I talk about my business with a lot, and he still doesn't.
I've had that same experience, not with Tom, but with other people. Yeah. You
know, and so then it's like, okay, well, we'll have a, you know, I think in like May of last year we had this meeting in our office, which, you know, like the core IHEARTCOMIX team right now is around, like, depending on the day of the week, between like 6 to 8 folks, you know, and I asked everybody in the office, like, what do you think we do?
Mm-hmm.
And like what's, like, if someone asked you at a party what IHEARTCOMIX is, what's your answer? Everyone had a different answer.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like, all right, I have to change this.
Right.
You know, that was like a big problem. You know, and
how realistic is that though? I mean, I've seen, you know, I've sat in enough business classes and conference presentations that all say, you know, everyone at your company should be able to answer the question the same way. Your customers, your whatever, should all have the same message. I wonder how realistic that is.
True.
I mean, with 6 people, that's more manageable than if
Yeah.
you're Apple and you have.
Plus, I mean, like people have different parts of the business
Right. That's kind of what I mean, right?
that they're
Like,
focused on.
what it means to them might be a little different.
Sure, but they should still understand what the business does.
Yeah.
If it's like I work at Apple, we make computers. That's the real basic
Right.
thing.
Sure.
And then it's like, but I work on the phones or I work on marketing.
Yeah.
Then you can get a little bit more in depth, but you should know that one sentence.
Yeah.
And so then I had to ask myself the same thing. Like, do I know for myself exactly what we are, where we're trying to let go?
Yeah.
And the fact of the matter was, like, if I wanted people to take us more seriously as a editorial place, as a resource for ideas and content and build our own universe stuff, and like as an agency, I had to get rid of the one thing that was skewing that whole
Yeah, it
thing.
overshadows.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So for 2016, what is the answer? What do you do?
IHEARTCOMIX is the intersection between music and geek geek culture.
Okay.
So, that means that, if you go to our website, you'll see content and writing and stuff talking about things that are happening in the world that have to do with that. Most of our agency work is basically, people hiring us to bring music into a certain kind of context, or come up with ideas for something that's more geeky that can apply it to the cooler side of things, which is music.
Sure. Yeah.
And all of our attitude and art and everything will all make sense in that world. You won't see a random show
Yeah.
or a random piece of content that doesn't.
Sure. Well, that's concise. How do you define geek culture?
I say anything that is like genre based in terms of like film, right? So it's like superhero stuff, sci-fi stuff, like fantasy, franchises that can apply to TV and comics, video games, the culture that goes around that. So that's technology, certain types of like fashion, and books, like different kinds of personalities in the world that like show off that kind of stuff. Like someone like Pee Wee Herman.
Okay. He's got a new
movie coming
project.
out.
Yeah. You
Yeah.
guys should probably work on that.
Totally.
Yeah.
But like, it's not all straight fanfare in terms of like anything that you would see like at a con. Like someone like Nerdist, for example, has that covered fine.
Right.
But like we're more interested in maybe like talking to Grimes about her favorite anime, or like digging into like how music has influenced the Marvel films, or like like really kind of finding those bridges, like Flying Lotus just made this short film that is this like horror movie, which is great. Like that is totally in our cross section of stuff that we want to explore.
Yeah.
On the music side, there's plenty of news outlets.
Sure.
Pitchfork, Fader, Rolling Stone. All those guys are great at that. We don't. There doesn't need to be another outlet. Just
Right.
advertising the new song or video or tour.
Absolutely.
And as I said with Nerdist, in other sites of that, like any new movie casting or release date, all that stuff is good.
Right.
But like We're really meant to kind of be in the middle and like, you know, I feel like there's a lot of other people like me in the world that aren't just fans of one thing, that aren't defined by one thing, and you know, not just interests, but you know, how media is growing and how genre is changing. That's the world that we're going into.
Yeah.
That those lines are blurred.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting, you know, how these things all come together. And, you know, going back to Loose Tooth and fucking awesome in those days, you know, we had Mike B on the show, and he talked about, you know, his experience with Banana Split, which was kind of happening around the similar time frame.
Yeah.
And which was, you know, it was about dance music and hip hop, you know, sort of having the same conversation about fun, right? And, you know, as a reaction to all the bottle service and all the, you know, thuggery and all the different stuff that were impacting that culture, right? And I think, you know, I was thinking about how, you know, from the outside, these things all look the same, right? And they, you know, people think about EDM as like this one thing, right? Or they think about hip hop as this one thing, or even punk rock, right? You know, you have these, unless you're in it,
For sure.
right? It all feels very homogeneous, and that you can, and you know, I know we both are in the business of working with brands and helping them navigate those nuances, right? Because, you know, I'm sure you've had the conversation with a brand who just, you know, is looking at it from the outside and it really only sees the broad strokes. How do you do that? How do you take them into some of those nuances and translate those into what will be meaningful for them?
Well, I think from our end, you know, I've got a decade plus of losing money, but along the way defining what our voice was, you know, or is, you know, and like, so we have this like history of stuff to be able to pull from, to be able to show, you know, this is the impact that we've been able to like have, and this is how we can translate that for you. Yeah. I feel like that's our biggest asset in those conversations, just like real proof.
So what do brands do, or what should they do to kind of get the best out of a relationship with you?
Trust us. I feel like, you know, I'm still learning how to like fully express all those things on like a business view. But I think the reason why certain brands have been so engaged and coming back to us is that we really care about our work, for like one, but we want to make sure that, you know, what we're doing is authentic and, you know, actually shows results. And, you know, and in order to like do that, you need to be able to express to the audience in a genuine way. And I feel like that's something that we're good at. Yeah, I don't know if that answers the
I think it
question
does.
or
I
not.
mean, it's so interesting. You know, I think that as you're talking, it's like the difference between what we do, and I think, you know, in some ways we're in the same business, versus, you know, an ad agency, is that, you know, those guys have mountains of data about the audiences that they're going to reach, but they don't know any of them.
Yeah.
They've never met their target consumer, and much less they've never had drinks with them, spent a whole night with them, had them, sweating and dancing their ass off and having the times of their lives.
Totally.
Right. And so, I think we're all, and including the agency, like everyone's in the business of trust me. Right.
Yeah.
But it's a different type of trust, and it's a different type of, you talk about authenticity, right? And the reality is, if you're in your business or in mine, and you do work that isn't right, that doesn't resonate, then you're not going to be able to do that any longer.
Yeah, well, because it's not just having the trust of the brands; it's having the trust of the audience.
Right. Absolutely.
And the artists.
Yeah.
So, we can't do just anything.
Right.
Like, we have to be particular on certain levels, and I think like the one advantage of having taken that harder road is that we've set ourselves up to be a place where you don't come to us unless you want a certain thing.
Yeah.
And that certain thing can be molded and reshaped to be appropriate for whoever's brand, but it's still at the core is going to be us. And because as you said, you can go to any agency and just get that, and that's what you want, then cool, go there. I mean, we even take the same with the current version of our label. We take the same approach like the artist too. It's like we're not there to only service the artist. We're not a business. We want to add to the artist and have our say in how that looks and how the video looks and how they look for the time that they're with us. And like some people see that as a good thing because it'll help them.
Yeah.
Some people don't, and it's not good or bad either way. But if you want to work with us, we want to have our stamp and our voice.
So I want to go back to the beginning a little bit though. How'd you first get started in music? You were playing in bands.
Mm-hmm.
What was there a how'd you first fall in love with music or decide you wanted to make music?
Well, my first real experience with music was Michael Jackson when I was very young.
Which record?
Thriller. Which came out like 82, right? So I was like 4, so it was like just at the time that I was like conscious of music. And my father at the time had MTV on constantly. So it was like he was either watching sports or that was just on. So like 80s music videos and that whole era was just like I was around it a lot.
And do you remember the first? Was it like Thriller? Was the video, or was there one before that impacted you?
I can't really remember one before that. Like things like Billy Idol and Cyndi Lauper and like all that stuff. Like those images are pretty vivid. Van Halen, but Michael Jackson was always like, especially as a kid, it was like the fucking shit. But then in junior high school, I was like really into like the early '90s like soul rap stuff. So like Boyz II Men and Belle Biv DeVoe and TLC, like all that shit was like I was very into it. And then I kind of got introduced to underground music in 7th grade through Nirvana, when Nevermind came out in 1991, and through being into that kind of music, met another group of kids that kind of introduced me to, things like Operation Ivy and like No Effects and the Misfits and that whole scene. And I was starting to become not as in love with the direction that mainstream R&B was going, and I was like really into this new sound, and especially the world that came with that sound.
Yeah.
Until then, music was very distant, you know.
Yeah.
Like I was living in Indiana, so there wasn't a place to really go see pop stars or
Sure.
even know how to become a pop star, you
Right.
know. But as soon as I found bands, you could go down the like street to someone's basement and see it and like be a part of that world.
Yeah.
Uh,
Do you remember your did you start playing in bands at that time?
yeah, I started playing drums when I was 14.
Do you remember your first show?
Yeah, I moved to Okinawa, Japan, for my sophomore and junior year
Oh, nice.
of high school and joined my first band there.
Like a punk band.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I didn't have a drum set, so I had to borrow a drum set every time that we played a show, so I could practice on pots and pans.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty funny.
That's awesome.
And then, you know, I was in like a couple like high school bands there, and then I moved back to Indiana when I was 17, and was very driven to join a band, and saw a flyer around town for this like political pop punk band, and like the flyer was just like, if you're anti-racist, anti-government, blah blah blah, like vegan, like every single thing that you could possibly be.
Yeah.
We're trying to find a drummer.
Nice.
And like I had never heard of those politics really.
Yeah.
I mean, like in general, but not as like this like militant thing.
Right.
Because even like my view of like punk rock or the underground was still very much mixed with like 90s alt rock and then like surface level pop, like punk rock bands like Misfits and Black Flag and stuff, like stuff that you could see any kid with a shirt
Right.
on with, you know. Even though it was like a little bit more underground because it was the mid 90s, it's still like pretty like accessible stuff. So I wrote these guys, or no, I guess I called them. There was no email yet.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, I agree with everything on the flyer, although I'm not vegan and I smoke. And I went and auditioned for the band, and we played a show 2 days later. This band was called Operation Cliff Clavin. You probably wouldn't have heard of us unless you were like really into the DIY pop punk scene. But
Nice.
like we had a pretty good go in that scene for a few years. We
Nice.
actually played a show last summer.
Oh, cool. Well, if you're an Operation Cliff Clavin fan, hit us up on Twitter. We want to hear from you.
But we through them I learned what I guess being a punk really meant,
Yeah.
and the idea of like DIY. We booked our own tours, we put out our own records. You know, like the independent record labels, distribution, touring networks, clubs, all those things didn't really exist yet.
Right.
You know, like the idea of someone like the Windish agency wasn't around.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Like Matador, Sub Pop, all those things were like pretty new still and not that established, very much still like underground.
Yeah.
And there was no like distribution chain really. Like it, like so, you know, we would make our own records, and then, you know, you would like print them, and then you'd play shows with bands, and you would trade records to sell each other's records. That was how you know, records got
Right.
you know, in other towns if you weren't on a major.
Yeah.
You know, like there was no agency, so you had to like, you know, there was no email, so you had to like just get numbers from other bands and call random people that you didn't know to book shows at their house.
Yeah.
And hope that the show was happening when you showed up. You know,
That's
like,
interesting.
like, and sometimes it wasn't,
Right.
because they got in trouble with their mom or something, you know.
Sure. I mean, it's
you know,
so
like,
interesting. Like that's, you know, record stores were so important to that whole thing, right? Because they'd have the flyers.
Yeah, I mean, we would
out
go
and-
into every time we went to, we'd go to the record store and see if they would buy our
Right.
records.
Right.
And they might buy like one or two.
Sure. And then
Yeah.
you'd see flyers for the shows, and you'd learn about the venues. But it's interesting you're telling this because it's very similar to the story you just told about sort of being all about one thing and then shedding that and moving on to something else, right? And I can kind of imagine, you know, to go from being a fan of Michael Jackson and MTV and you know, Belle Biv DeVoe to, like, you don't just get to add no effects to your repertoire, right? Like, you have to let go of that other stuff. You know what I mean? You can't,
For sure.
you're not going to show up to your, you know, punk rock practice in like a Michael Jackson t-shirt, right? Like, because that culture is so insular and so rejecting of everything that's not that. And
But that's also why later, when we got those dance nights going, I was like, there was like a sense of freedom.
Sure.
You know, and like, and actually like that whole process of like rejecting things that I loved, learning how to love something else, and then realizing that I needed to be me and bringing those things back, like that taught me a big a lesson, you know?
I'm sure.
And, you know, like I've kind of always taken that core into everything else that I've done after.
Yeah. Well, it seems like you're a guy that's discovered these things along the way, right? Like, you know, you discovered this DIY punk world that existed before you, but it was happening kind of in its own thing, right? And then, you know, you got to be part of that, and then, like you said, you discovered this connection with dance music that was happening over time, right, as well. And so I wonder, you know, and you talked about you get older and your priorities change and all that. So are you going to be like the guy that discovers these new things, you know, throughout your life and career? Or, you know, was that a phase and now you shift gears? And
I mean, I would hope that I'm always finding new things. I think like forward motion is very important.
Yeah.
You know, and like whether it's like for myself or something that the business is doing, like being able to adapt and, you know, really kind of like follow the things that are like making sense is important, you know, and like not being afraid to change, like not being afraid to discover new things and be ourselves. You know, I think those are very important things. Yeah. And I hope it's something that we never lose.
Well, so you talk about, you know, competition, and I know the, you know, competition in the concert business is famous, infamous, right? You know, from just like high stakes to dirty tactics, right? It's all kind of shit that goes on. But like with what you were doing, you know, with Fucking Awesome and even Check Yo for a while, like you were under the radar of the AEGs and the Live Nations and those. It just wasn't something they were paying attention to. And
now they are.
Now they are.
Yeah.
Right. And so, like you said, that makes it really hard to then compete. So, well, I guess first of all, are there? How has that competition played out for you? Like any particular stories that stand out?
In terms of promoting, with the big dogs, nothing directly. If anything, like we developed a relationship with with them both.
Right.
And there's any amount of opportunity to work with Golden Voice or Live Nation, and they've never been assholes.
Mm-hmm.
They're actually they've been very supportive for the most part.
Sure.
In terms of on a one-on-one basis. At the same time, it's like the moves that they're making on a business level make sense. I understand it's not like a personal thing. It's not like, how do we get IHEARTCOMIX out of the market? It's market share.
Yeah.
They have to grow.
Absolutely.
Mainly, it's the competition between each of them.
Yeah.
But I think one of the side effects of that is just how it changes things.
Yeah.
And Los Angeles is a very interesting space when it comes to music, and especially when it comes to events, because the influence here is so high.
Mm-hmm.
All the way from Coachella all the way down to the smell. They're the individual branded events and nights and things that happen here are incredibly influential and important, and I think unique to Los Angeles and the history of music culture.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like how you were saying before about genre. Unless you're in the middle of it, you don't see all the things that are going on. I would say the same is true about here, in terms of anywhere else in the world, and you look in, you can see that there's things going on, but maybe you're a fan of one kind of music, so you only see Rhonda, or maybe you only see Hard, or maybe you only see FYF, or Brownies and Lemonade, or Ham and Everything, or Check Yo Ponytail, right? But if you're in the middle of it, and you look around you, there's 20 or 30 very influential branded events that are franchised out across the world that have a definitive look, style, logo, and sound.
Mm-hmm.
You say you say Rhonda, or you see their logo, and you understand exactly what that is.
Yeah.
That's a hugely powerful thing.
Right.
And it makes sense that someone like Golden Voice or Live Nation or whoever notice that and figure out how to use it to their advantage. But but it's something that has played a huge part in creating the music culture that is Los Angeles now,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is the healthiest place for music in the world.
Mm-hmm.
But from an outside view, it's hard to see all of that.
Yeah.
You have to be in the middle.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you, as you're sort of figuring out this evolution, it had to occur to you that, one option is to go further in that direction, sell to one of those guys and just be events.
Mm-hmm.
How did you process that option?
I thought about it. I just feel like my heart wasn't in it.
Yeah.
It wasn't. I felt like it was if we did that, it wasn't really the best choice for the brand.
Mm-hmm.
And I just I think it took me in a. I felt like it took me in the wrong direction as a business person. The reason that we stopped the original label back in 2009 wasn't because it was unsuccessful. It was because it was working.
Yeah.
I never wanted to be a full-time label manager.
Mm-hmm.
Once it crossed the line of working with an artist to create something new and exciting to sales and distribution, I hated it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I like to say it was like buying a bunch of dogs that would never die. You know, like, you know, it's really great when you have like one or two and they're like super cute. You know, you get to play with them and stuff.
Yeah.
Then when you have like 19 of them and all you're doing is picking up shit and feeding them and walking them, you
Yeah.
have no time left to yourself or to even enjoy them. What's the point? You know,
Right.
it's like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna be chained to those dogs for the rest of my life. You know,
That's awesome.
and it was the same thing with that. And I told it, like, whether it's the label or the events or like whatever, to me it was always an expression of my art.
Mm-hmm.
It was like an expression of like different things in the world that brought me joy, and I loved bringing them in and adding my own drawings or ideas to it, and then reshaping that into something new and giving it out. Once it crossed the line into straight business, I just didn't care, you know. And so it would be like, I think, irresponsible of me to try and fake that, you know. And like, and as you said, like the evolution of coming to grips with things and like letting things go, was really realizing that for myself. And I don't think I was able to until I pushed things to the furthest that they could go.
So you seem really in touch with what works for you.
Mm-hmm.
How'd that happen? Have you always been like that?
I think so, on a certain level. You know, I was an only child growing up, and I was always pretty focused on, you know, just drawing and doing my own thing. I don't think I always have known exactly what those things were, you know, but I always kind of knew what direction I was going in. A lot of times at the annoyance of my parents and my teachers.
Sure.
You know, because I was just like, no, I don't care about that. I just want to do this.
What? How
but
did
I
you
had
start?
to experiment a lot to kind of find the middle ground.
Yeah, I'm sure. And how does your art and music, how do they influence each other?
A lot, especially in terms of like the art that I draw is highly influenced from, you know, my world.
Yeah.
But, you know, and then like my surroundings make the most sense to me visually. So, you know, it's like, you know, applying one to like each, you know, like it's weird nowadays because like really it's kind of become one and the same. But I remember when I lived in Bellingham or Seattle, when I was like doing shows, like it was like so important to like me to like get the opportunity to make the flyer for the show, whether it was mine or like somebody else. If it was an artist that I really loved, I wanted to be able to like, you know, have my like say and how that was.
So as your taste in music has evolved, has your art evolved? Can you see the way that your art has evolved with that?
On certain levels. I mean, the real root of it is the same. Like they have a certain style, gotten better or more refined. But the real like root of the like black and white or like watercolor comic style stuff is there. If anything, as I've gotten older, I've learned how to translate that to other mediums. You know, like in the last couple of years, I've gotten into directing music videos, and a lot of the characters or how the scenes are laid out are very similar to how I would draw it.
Sure.
And that's something I didn't even notice until a friend of mine was like, "Oh, it's like watching one of your comics."
Oh, that's cool.
You know, and it was like the I don't know. I guess it's just how I see things.
I'm not a comic book guy, but you know, I appreciate it, and I appreciate how pervasive it is into global culture, right? That
Well, there's nothing more mainstream right now than a comic book.
Absolutely, and you know, to some extent, it's been that way. I mean, I think it goes in phases a little bit, but it's been that way for decades, for 100 years, right?
Yeah.
Why is that? What is it about comics that is so universal that just speaks to people?
What's the modern myth, right? Like, it's like every culture has had their gods.
Yeah.
It's ours.
Yeah.
And like it just has the advantage of being told in this like serial nature.
Mm-hmm.
And all the merchandising things based around it, but the real core of it is the same classic archetypes that the Greeks had and all that stuff. It's all there. It's just part of human culture.
Well, I've noticed I have a 6-year-old son, and he's crazy about all the comic book toys and books and movies and all that stuff. And it's really easy for him to separate the world into good guys and bad guys,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we often have conversations about how real life may not be that simple.
Sure.
That there aren't good people do bad things and bad people do good things and whatever, right? There's a lot more gray area
For sure.
in the real world, but for him, I've sort of learned that appeal through him, that like you can separate the world in those movies and stories.
Yeah.
In a way that just makes sense.
I mean, I feel like it's something that has always been appealing to like me. Like I'm the first one to admit I'm not super read when it comes to like classic books and novels and that kind of stuff. Like,
Yeah.
I've read a few, but the majority of my reading in my life has been graphic novels or comics or articles. So like I've derived the majority of like my morality, I would say, and like knowledge from comics.
Is there one that you can think of in particular?
Not necessarily. I mean, like like the Marvel universe is probably like the one thing I've followed the longest and the broadest.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, like I don't take comic book stories like seriously.
Sure.
Yeah.
But in terms of like a moral
like,
lesson or value, is there?
The general themes are there.
Yeah.
And I think it's helped me try to be a better person. It's not for everybody, but I like it. Like if I was to have something in my life that was closest to a religion, I would say somewhere between that and what I learned from the DIY punk scene helped me define like what my like moral code is. You know?
So is there one quality that stands out that's gotten you to this point?
Determination.
Okay.
Like I guess just like being able to figure things out. I think my biggest strength is my ability to solve problems.
So when has that been tested most strongly for you?
Probably these last few years, like the last 2 years of really just like putting in so much extra time to like piece by piece take everything away and try and build it back up, like solving the ultimate puzzle. It's been hard. Like there's been like maybe like cases here and there of like one thing or like like hey, we booked this big show and the venue just went into flames and we had to like rechange things,
Right.
But like that stuff doesn't even bother me anymore. It's just a problem that needs to be solved. Like
Sure.
the real like kind of like soul changing thing has just been this massive process, which I feel like we're still in.
Yeah.
But it's like I can see the light at the end of the tunnel now.
Yeah. Is there anything, so as you evolve and the business evolves and all that, what do you have to let go of in terms of like your there's this idea that like certain things get you to one point and then they hold you back, right? So is there stuff that you're having to shed about yourself?
I think like being in control of everything, like learning how to trust and lead. You know, like all those are still like the things I'm becoming a lot more comfortable with. But as things change and grow, like you have to like let go of certain things. You know, I was very protective of what I was doing for a long time because I felt like we were vulnerable, and especially like with like I'd had a couple bad experiences in the past where I felt like things were like taken from me.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, like, but things just reach a certain level to where you have to open yourself up. You have to challenge yourself to communicate and, you know, think about things differently, you know, and that's been the hardest, you know. It's like really like, you know, analyze yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. You know? Have you had mentors that have helped you or taught you things along the way?
Sure.
Yeah. What's the most important lesson someone's taught you?
A real basic one was like, if you don't ask, you don't get. You know.
I love that. We had a guest on the show that uses that as kind of his mantra.
You know that it's so simple and basic, but it really, you know, opened up a lot of things. Because if you're like just sitting there waiting for someone to bring you something, it probably won't happen.
Yeah.
Or they won't bring you what you want.
Yeah.
You know, I think that like if you have an idea of what you want or like an expectation for yourself of what you think you're capable of, you have to express that.
Mm-hmm. What'd you learn from Steve Aoki?
How to fight.
Yeah.
You know, like he and I, you know, like we're cool now. We had a few years where we weren't, but
I think while we were doing Loose Tooth, you guys were like beefing over something.
we were on our way out.
Yeah.
You know.
I remember that.
But you know, like, well, I'm not a fan of every single thing that he's done for himself. The one thing that, you know, the one quality that I do admire in him is his, you know, his willingness to really fight for what he thinks, you know, he needs.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. And do you find yourself embracing that?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
You know, I think, you know, like, that's why our fights used to get so intense, because we're both fighters.
Yeah.
You know, so like you put us in a box, like we'll claw each other's eyes out.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, sometimes you got to go through that and see what happens on the other side.
Yeah. You know, like even the years where we were fighting, I think were like some of the best years for us both, because there was a real energy there to like one up the other. You know, to like, you know, like it was like a war, you know, which was, you know, it can have its own benefits.
Mm-hmm. A lot of people get rich during war.
Totally.
Yeah. That's great. Is there a favorite night at Check Yo Ponytail that stands out?
There's been a lot of good ones, but I feel like the most impactful one was still October of 2006, when it was like Justice and Mastercraft, because that was like that was the night that I feel like was like, it's the marker of like when like electronic music became a reality here.
Yeah.
You know, that was such a crazy night, and you know, like I feel like every single person that was in that room, and then every person that wanted to be in that room, kind of like took that as like something new has arrived.
Yeah. Was there like, did it feel different the next day? Can you like, was it that sort of blatant?
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
It was like the majority of our shows became that after that. I feel like the majority of everyone else's shows, it was just this like, like something new had arrived.
Yeah. Nice. How are we on time? Okay.
Yeah. What?
Yeah, we're.
I'm just curious. I'm supposed to be on a call at like 12:15 or something.
Let's get you off.
Yeah.
12:15 now.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Last question. Favorite DJ?
Favorite DJ. Adam 12.
Nice.
Like there's a lot of maybe different DJs that are my favorite in the moment,
Yeah.
but Adam has always been consistent. He's got great taste in music,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a lot of people that make music right now, which you could call DJs, but like as far as being like a DJ's DJ, I feel like Adam really is that.
That's
like,
awesome.
I mean, that's like a skill that that I respect a lot.
Yeah, I love that. And Adam's a friend, and he's been on the show, and we talked about how I've just watched him just go up there and just murder it over and over and over years and decades.
Mm-hmm.
And not too many people can do that.
Totally.
It's pretty cool. Well, thanks, man. I appreciate you being here and being so generous with all the wisdom.
Of course.
We're definitely going to be following what happens, and come back anytime you want to promote something, and
Cool.
And we'll do it.
Thanks so much for having
Awesome.
me.
Right on. Yeah, that was Franki Chan. I hope you loved it as much as I did. Some good stories from that man. Come back next week. We have a very special guest, my man, the Professor. If you're into street ball and the new Ball Up League, you'll know who the Professor is. The rest of you will have to wait, and I'll school you just like the Professor will school you on the court.